When you fetch data in an application, your users are going to want to search. When you search, you want to make sure that it's performant and doesn't put too much strain on the database. That's why you want to debounce your search. In this video, we're going to be seeing how you can do that in Nuxt and Vue and how it can be very easy to set up. We're going to be using Supabase, some data that is in Supabase. So the example that we have here is I have some mock data with 1,000 files essentially. And so here I can, of course, search through it. And here, if I search something else, we can see that there's a bit of delay between the time that I stop typing and the time that it actually fetches the data. That's called debouncing. The reason is that we don't want to call to the database every time we do a key press. Because if you do that, if I type in a search item that is 4 letters, I'm going to do 4 calls to the database. That's not good. So what happens here is it waits for me to stop typing, and then it does after 300 milliseconds, it actually searches the data. And there's also a max wait time so that if I just never stop typing, there is still something that is being fetched to the database because otherwise, the results would be stale, right? So that is a good kind of guardrail for that. So let's actually see how it's set up. How to use this video is either to kind of get some inspiration and to see, okay, how those small elements can be used to build this thing. And then maybe also to actually see the different dots of how this application is built. And I'm not going to be walking you through creating it because I don't really believe in walkthroughs to kind of build stuff because your brain just kind of shuts off. I'd rather show you the different dots and then you connect the dots if you want to recreate this. The actual repository is up on GitHub. The link will be in the description. So feel free to look at this and actually clone it and try it for yourself. All right, let's do it. So here, as I said, we have some data in our Supabase. We've got 1,000 list of files with some random created ads. You can see that I have disabled row level security because I don't really want to care for that for this one. So let's actually go into the code here. So I've got my repository here open. We're going to start with the actual kind of page here. So the actual page is pretty simple that we have here. So everything is in the index.vue page. And so I'm going to try to make sure that we just focus on the relevant bits here. So we actually are calling a composable that is exposing the files. And then we're using a bit of, just for the sake of it, we're using Nuxt UI, which I really recommend, which actually lets you have pretty easy components to use. And so here we can see, if I just remove anything that is not necessary, we can see that we're passing the files to this table component right here. So that's what is actually being used, and we can ignore the rest here. We're just using this table here. And so essentially this is what is used to display the actual files. And then what is interesting as well is that we have this input here that is mapped to the search. And the search, we're going to see how it's set up here in the composable. So you can see here I've got a use get files, which exposes the files, the actual search elements, and then the status, which apparently I'm not using. We could use this to actually say, hey, is the data loading or not? So let's actually go into the use get files. This is very simple here. The main thing that we want to see is the actual fetch. So here we're still in kind of the front end piece of things. We're still in the view piece. I'm just separating things to make it simpler. So this composable here is calling useFetch, and I might do another video here about this, but basically we're calling an API endpoint in our server. Now we could be calling directly Supabase because Supabase allows for direct calls from the actual database, but I wanted to show kind of how to use from the actual client, but I wanted to actually see and show you how we can do that by calling the server. And we can see here that we're also creating this useFetch. We're calling this API/files. Because there's nothing specified here, we're using a get method from HTTP, a get request, and we're actually passing into the query of the actual fetching the search. And the search here, as we can see, is a use state. Now this basically means that we're going to be able to use this, and it's kind of like a ref on steroids, where we actually reference it as a string. So it's just kind of a reactive reference that is going to be unique throughout the application. So we can reference this search throughout the application, and it's going to be the same value essentially. And so we're using this and we're declaring this here, and we're returning both those things. So you can see here, this fetch is actually returning a couple things: the data, the status, if there's an error. So that's why I'm destructuring it here to the fetch, but fundamentally we're just using the files here, so the data that is actually being returned. And I'm also returning the search, so the search is declared in the composable, and it's actually being used in here and also being referenced in my input. And so of course my input here, if I go back to my here, so this is the input that is being searched. So when I type in something, that's what is being used. Cool. And so what we can see here is, this is a very important thing, is the watch debounced. And so essentially here, this is being used from Vue use, which is a very, very useful library, watch debounced from Vue use. And what this is doing is basically saying, hey, I'm watching the search, and as soon as the search is changing, I'll be looking for this, and I might just refresh the value and do another call. Don't worry about this initial first. It's kind of just forcing the refresh because there's some caching mechanisms here that are happening, but I'm just wanting to force the refresh here. And essentially this is refreshing the data. And then if I want to, I can then put the debounce. This is 300 milliseconds. So this is saying I'll be watching this search, but I won't do this until there is a pause, until this doesn't change for at least 300 milliseconds. And I will wait for no more than 1,000 milliseconds a second in this case. Now, what I also need to make sure that I put as a value in useFetch is watch false, because let's see what happens if I actually just don't do this. I'm going to save here. I'm going to go back. So I've turned off watch false, and what happens is that this, as you can see, I'm doing queries all the time. So at every key press. And the reason for this is that if we look at this search, this is passed in as a reactive reference. And so useFetch by default will see this, oh, this changed, so let me actually just do another call. And so there's going to be, of course, a lot of network calls here. If we look at this, you see there's a network call every time I actually type in something. So that's not good. So that's why we put watch false to make sure that we actually handle the watch manually in a way. So we're calling the files here, and then let's actually take a look at how the server is handled. Index.get.ts. So this is the /API/files/index.ts, index.get.ts. So we're using really the gets method here in this case. And we're declaring a client here. Actually, I might move the query here above. And so we're actually getting the query in this case of the call. So what we have here is that we're validating that the value that we get is search. So really what we have in our query object is query.search here. And this could be optional because we might not have anything in the search. That's why I'm using Zod here. I might do another video about this at some point. But basically we're using Zod and saying, hey, this is, we're expecting a string, and it might be optional because we might not have any search, in which case you just return the first 30 results, or whatever we set it to be. Here we have a Supabase client here that we're actually using in the server. So it's being typed. So we have a database. So that means that we're going to be having type safety. We're just building our Supabase query very simply here. We're saying, hey, let me get all the files and limit it to 30. Order it by name, so order it by alphabetical order. And then in this case, if the query is not null, so not null or not no characters, because that's a bit different. That's why I'm doing here is saying, hey, if the search is null, then consider that it's going to be an empty string. And so if that's not the case, then we actually create the query and we say we add to the query this condition is going to be insensitive. Is it character? Is it uppercase or lowercase insensitive like the search? So we're saying for the name here, and that's why we're saying, either before or after. So that's why we can actually do, like if I want to, for example, get all PPT files, I can just do, if I type in PPT, I can just get this here. And then we just query the data and we return either the data or an empty array so that we get some good type safety in this case. So that's pretty much it here to see how we can do some debounce. Very simple stuff. If you like this video, let me know. You've got the GitHub repo in the description, so feel free to use it. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.